Committee meeting to order. Before we get started, Representative Helgerson would like a point of personal privilege.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. We're going to deal with the Representative Holhauser's bill, correct? And is it in, can you table the bill before you have the hearing?
I don't think that's in order.
Okay.
Let's wait until we open the hearing. All right. All right. Committee, we're going to go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 2121, increasing the annual license fees of EV and hybrid passenger vehicles. Chris, could you give us an overview of the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. House Bill 2121 would increase the annual license fees of electric and hybrid passenger vehicles and trucks and all electric motorcycles. So beginning with section 1, that would amend KSA 8-143, which is a statute that provides for the annual registration license fees for various types of vehicles. Currently in KSA 8-143 does provide that motor vehicles that are electric hybrid or plug-in electric hybrid are subject to an annual license fee of $50, and motor vehicles that are all electric vehicles are subject to an annual license registration fee of $100. And relatedly, KSA 8-143 also provides an annual license fee for motorcycles of $16. What the bill would do would increase fees for electric hybrid or plug-in electric hybrid motor vehicles from $50 to $100, and increase the fees for all electric motor vehicles from $100 to $175. The bill would also create new categories of annual registration fees for all electric motorcycles and trucks and truck tractors with a gross weight of 12,000 pounds or less that are electric hybrid, plug-in electric hybrid, or all electric. And the amounts for those new categories would be $30 for all electric motorcycles and $125 for electric hybrid or plug-in electric hybrid trucks or truck tractors with a gross weight of 12,000 pounds or less, and $200 for those same all-electric trucks and truck tractors with the same gross weight. Then section 2, near the back of the bill, would amend 8-145, which is a statute that provides for the disposition of registration fees. The bill would credit those new fees and fee increases collected for all electric motorcycles, motor vehicles that are electric hybrid, plug-in electric hybrid, or all electric, and trucks and tractors that are electric hybrid, plug-in electric hybrid, or all electric, to the State Highway Fund and Special City and County Highway Fund as specified in KSA 79-34-142. That statute divides out motor fuel taxes, so we're kind of borrowing that same distribution. And so for those fees, 66.37% would be distributed to the State Highway Fund, and 33.63% would be distributed to the Special City and County Highway Fund. The bill also says that for the amounts distributed to the Special City and County Highway Fund, they would also be apportioned in the same way as in KSA 79-3425C, which divides those amounts between counties and cities. So again, for those new fees and fee increases that are distributed to the Special City and County Highway Fund, 57% would go to counties and 43% to cities, as that distribution is in 79-3425C. The provisions of the bill, if enacted, would become effective on January 1, 2026. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Anybody have any questions for the reviser? Representative Delperdane.
Thank you, Chris. Good explanation there. A couple of years ago in this committee, I believe, we ran a bill concerning electric bicycles. And on this, on page 1, line number 10, it says all applications for registration of motorcycles, motorized bicycles. So will this include electric bicycles?
No, on page 31, on page 1, motorized bicycles are still in there, and the fee is $11 as it has been for a while.
So it does include motorized bicycles?
There's not an increase, but yes, they're still accounted for in the statute as they are now. There is no increase for motor.
Do we pay
bicycles.
for electric bicycles today? That's news to me.
I would ask the reviser that question.
Yeah, so today we pay to have electric bicycles?
If the person chooses to register, I'll have to see if they are required to register, if it's just an
Please
option, but
Follow up.
I'll
I'd
get back
just
to you
like
on
to
that.
know. Thank you.
Any other questions for the reviser? If not, next item on the agenda is Jill Shelley with research, has a research paper that I think everybody has it at their desk, and she's going to go through that for us.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Jill Shelley with the Legislative Research Department. I'm here today to very quickly walk you through a memorandum that was placed at your desks and is available on the KLRD website under the transportation option. It states fees for electric and hybrid vehicles, and Walter Schmidt and I put this together for you. We found separate fees on electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, or both in 39 states. We mostly identified those states using a list on the NCSL website, but we did verify and look through lots of information in addition to NCSL. So the amounts of the fees, which are probably what you're mostly interested in, are pages 1 through 4 of this memorandum. For all electric vehicles, those fees range from less than $30 to $400. And you may notice that some of those fees listed are oddly specific, like $128.14. That's because that is the fee listed on an official website after an adjustment provided for in law, such as for the Consumer Price Index. For all the states except Kansas, the fees listed are in addition to other registration fees. In Kansas, that $70 or $100 is already is not separate from the $30 that applies to most passenger vehicles. So in the next section on page 4 describes where those fees go. For 77 of the 39 states, including Kansas, registration fees, including these, go to their equivalents of the State Highway Fund. At least 5 direct some or all of those registration fees to EV-specific infrastructure, such as Vermont. But the monies may be split with other purposes too, such as municipalities in Ohio. Perhaps that is equivalent to the Special City and County Highway Fund. I don't really know. The adjustments to fees section, starting on page 5, provides general information about the factors that the 14 of these states are using to annually or periodically adjust the rates charged for these vehicle registrations. Most of them, but certainly not all of them, use the Consumer Price Index as a measure of inflation. But note that Kentucky's adjustment is based on, or will be starting this year, based on the National Highway Construction Cost Index. Some states have established future increases on dollar amounts in statute, but some adjust based on fuel efficiency, miles driven, and fuel tax rates. To provide information on how EV fees compare with basic registration rates, we've included that section starting on page 6 for what we found about the basic registration fees and the basis for the fees. There's lots of little numbers on your registration bill. We did not try to attempt to find those for multiple states. But not all fees are based on weight like Kansas does. We have vehicle age, vehicle value, the age of the registrant, how many years the vehicle has been registered in that state. And those are all among the possibilities of the basis for a fee, for the basic registration fee. In the last section of the memorandum, there's a small section on the applicability of fees to other alternative fuels. I mentioned that because, like Nebraska defines an alternative fuel, which it also would similarly base registration fees on, to include any source of energy not otherwise taxed under the motor fuel laws but used to power a motor vehicle. And in case you need more details, we've provided all our sources on pages 8 and 9, and I'd be happy to try to answer questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Jill? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jill. I'm sorry if you mentioned this. I was just trying to find, do any of these states, and this research may not cover it, but do they charge the fees for the motorcycles, trucks, and truck tractors as well, to your knowledge, or is that separate?
They do. We did not attempt to capture those for this memorandum, but we do have some information about that. It is primarily a passenger vehicle fee at this point, but several states expand theirs to specifically include electric motorcycles and of some commercial vehicles.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jill? All right, thank you very much. Next on the agenda is the fiscal note. Looks like the fiscal note would increase state revenues by $3.5 million beginning in 2026. And of that, 1.1 million will go to our state and local governments. So keep that in mind as we go through this. All right. Any questions regarding the fiscal note? I do see we have some people from revenue here. Maybe they could answer those if there was any questions. All right. Next on the agenda, we'll move on to the proponents. Our first proponent today is Representative Nick Hoheisel, District 97. Welcome to the committee, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Francis, Vice Chair Essex, Ranking Member Helgerson. I can say your last name, right? And esteemed members of the House Transportation Committee, as well as Representative Wilborn. I want to throw you in there. You have my testimony in front of you. Everybody should have it. Representative Anderson, I believe yours is in color. Just want you to see that. First, I want to make it clear, I'm not trying to be punitive here. I'm not trying to punish EV drivers. We have a lot of great EV investment going on in Kansas. We have GM, which recently announced a new $400 million investment in their Fairfax plant to produce the new Chevy Bolt EV. Great investment. I love jobs. I love investment. It's a great thing. We also have Panasonic that we're all aware of making EV batteries. This highlights the growth and the future and the promise of this EV technology. So that stuff should be celebrated. Those investments in Kansas absolutely should be celebrated. However, in order to get people to those jobs, in order to support those businesses, we have to have good infrastructure. And how do you pay for the infrastructure? Well, good roads, fuel sales tax. Kansas roads and highways are primarily funded through our state motor fuels tax, which is 24 cents per gallon. Those funds are directed into our Department of Transportation, as well as our city county highway fund. I have more on that in a second. The EVs that are using our roads do not pay into that, but they use them. And on average, EVs are about 10 to 30-ish% heavier than our regular combustible engine vehicles. These fees, and you have to understand, when you're looking at the report that Shelley just broke down, it's a very good report. I'm not going to say it's deceiving, because that implies intent, but I don't think it gives really the full story. So right now in Kansas, if you have a regular combustible engine vehicle, you pay a flat $30 to $40, depending on the weight, registration fee when you go to register your vehicle. That money goes into the state highway fund as well. EV vehicles do not pay that. So the $50 a year hearing, you have to subtract that $30 base registration fee out to get the real number. So our hybrids really, we'll call it a EV excess fee, is $20 for hybrids and $70 or $60, depending on the weight, for regular EV vehicles. And that's the real rate they're paying. I've got some math here in my testimony that shows, and I know there's going to be some folks following with different math than I, and I'm happy to have that discussion with them after. But I found Kelly Blue Book in 2022, the average Kansas driver traveled 15,269 miles. Now, a newer GAT model car averages about 25.5 miles per gallon. So when you do that math, you get 598.39 gallons of fuel consumed annually in Kansas. Times that by 0.24 for the 24 cents fuel sales tax, you get 143.61 in lost fuel sales tax revenue with full EVs. Now, again, you have to take that 143 and add that $30 registration fee that us and the regular cars pay. And that's how I kind of came up with the $175 number. Now, again, there's other folks that have other math. I'm glad to happy to check that math after and have those conversations. And then the second piece of this is we have an 18-cent per gallon federal fuel fee. There's no mechanism to capture that. And so based on my math, that's $107 extra in federal fuel sales tax that are not being collected. And that money obviously comes down on federal highway projects and down to Kansas. So that's where I get the math from the 175 and 100. The second provision in this, it seems to be an oversight, and we've talked with Department of Revenue, we've talked to Revisor's office. We have things like the Ford F-150 Lightning, the Cybertruck, and I will make a confession. I'm probably one of the few. I like the Cybertruck. I want to buy a Cybertruck. The wife's not going to allow me to buy a Cybertruck, but I think they're cool and I want to buy one. But right now, how our statute reads, we're not even collecting the base registration fee for those trucks because of how the statute reads. So these Cybertrucks that are 6,500 pounds, we're collecting that base $30 registration fee because it's classified as just a regular vehicle, and we're collecting nothing on top in lost motor fuels tax. They're not even paying the $100 EV registration fee because of how the statute reads. So the second part of this fixes that and brings those Cybertrucks and those Ford F-150 Lightnings and trucks like that back into the fold of EV registrations. And then the third one is how our motor fuels tax is broken down in the state of Kansas. As they said, is 66% goes to the state highway fund, 33% goes to our counties and our cities. Since we're using this fee to supplement the motor fuels tax lost, I think it's only fair that we take that exact same formula on the motor fuels tax and apply it to the EV registration fees so our city and our county partners receive some of that funding to help with their roads. So that's why that third provision is in there. The math is all there. I will highlight again, I kind of got off base with the report that Shelley just gave. I actually, if you guys have my testimony, I actually highlight where we would be if you take that $30 base EV registration fee off. We would be the third lowest in the country. Colorado and South Carolina would be the only two that are cheaper than ours. And under the new rate, we're going to be about middle of the pack when you take that $30. And again, it's $30 or $40 based on the weight. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to the EV vehicles because a lot of these are heavy, and I'm only applying the $30 math, even though quite a few of these are over and they should be in the $40 area. Given the benefit of the doubt, because again, I'm not trying to be punitive. So that's the whole point. And then if you flip the next page, it's the same thing. Right now, if you take the $30 base fee out for hybrids, we're actually cheapest in the country, $20. Under this bill, we'll go again to about middle of the pack, right where Montana is and just below Idaho. So again, not being punitive, we're not going to be the most expensive or even close to the most expensive in the country. Based on my math, this is kind of generally where it's at. As Shelley said too, there are a number of states that index these fees. I don't necessarily understand why they index these fees unless they're indexing the motor fuels tax as well. So I think that's an all or nothing thing. Our fees will remain static here, just I believe as long as the motor fuels tax fees stay static. If we ever decided the indexed motor fuels tax, we should index this as well. But to me, that's an all or nothing. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Representative Hoheisel? Representative Goddard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate, Representative, your effort in putting this out here. Do you happen to know how propane vehicles might be taxed? Is there a tax on the propane?
I have no clue on that. I can call Hank Hill, who does propane and propane accessories, and maybe he would know. But I have no clue. I'm not aware of anybody that has a propane vehicle, if that's a actual thing that we're seeing on the streets. But I would love, I mean, that's something that we can definitely research.
And I think a couple of us know that. I'll let Representative Minix, because he works probably in that area. You wanted to address that, didn't you, the propane thing? Oh, okay. Anyway, and we can have Chris verify it, but there is a provision in the existing statutes. You know, we've got those LNG and CNG vehicles where they do pay a tax based upon the BTUs or something like that. We can get that information to you. We've got Representative Elperding in front of you.
Thank you. And you might have the revisor add natural gas to it, because that's another thing, but there's got to be a method out
There's an
there.
LNG.
So
one, I think.
I'm impressed with the research you've done with it, because I did a bunch too. You did miss one figure there. Not all vehicles burn gasoline, some burn diesel, and that's actually 26 cents per gallon in Kansas. So I received an email from a constituent, and they were concerned, if I can just read a sentence out of this thing, but they were looking at, it's an older couple, they were looking at maybe 12,000 miles a year. So it said even a vehicle averaging 12,000 miles, which is typically what insurance companies put on your policy at 30 miles per gallon, and they're trying to give out, this is how much it would be. But I did the figures on that, and at 12,000 miles per year, 30 mile per gallon, it comes out to about $170. So that would be real close to what we're trying to do here.
I received that exact same email last night, and I replied back. I will say first, 30 miles per gallon average. Where are we getting that at?
I understand.
So that was my first thing, is 30 miles per hour. That I have no data to back up that we're on average getting 30 miles per gallon out there.
So my
so-
concern is more so the number of people that I know with them that actually charge them at home. And if you charge at home, how do you pay the road tax, and how, maybe if I could get revisers to follow up, I'd like to know what is the fines and penalties if a farmer puts red diesel in a pickup? And how is that different from charging at home and not paying any road tax?
Yeah, and so if I may, Mr. Chairman, kind of follow up on that thought process, there is no perfect plan out there currently to catch this. There really isn't. There's not a perfect, we're talking about RUC charges, road usage charges. We're talking about, okay, let's charge them at the point of charging, and maybe we can collect it. There is no perfect plan out there. Now the technology is not there. This, to me, is the best we have right now to collect these fees, to be able to pay for our roads.
No,
So-
it is a very complex subject. I've read studies from Vermont. They had a very thorough one out there that's been quite interesting to read through. But the only other option we've got here is we start having Big Brother, us, monitoring where your vehicle's going and how far it's going. And that is an imposition on your privacy rights, as far as I'm
And I think
concerned.
that is one of the biggest barriers of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is the privacy aspect on that. And that's why I think this makes the most sense right now.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree entirely. It needs to increase the registration rate. In my opinion, you've almost bent over backwards to not be punitive. Earlier in your statements, you said those vehicles are 20 or 30% heavier. To start and stop those will be about 20 to 30% more wear and tear on our highways. To be entirely equitable, I think your figure's good, but we need to increase it by 20 or 30%, in my opinion.
I appreciate it, and I believe there'll be some testimony coming after me that references a study from Nebraska and what this is doing. Again, I've gotten that from people. I've gotten representatives come to me and said, "You're going too low on this." I've also had some folks that come and say, "Oh, you're going too high. You're trying to punish these," and that's not the case at all. I'm trying to find that sweet spot. I don't want to deter people from getting EVs. I don't. That's not something I want. People, if they want to invest in them, that is a free market choice. God bless. I hope they get the Cybertruck that I'm not going to be able to get. But I agree with your statement. I personally believe we could have gone higher and that we should have gone higher. However, in the interest of getting something passed, in the interest of bringing folks to the table, I think we're going to be able to find kind of a sweet spot where we start recouping. And again, in a couple of years, maybe we have this conversation again, or maybe there comes a better way where we can recoup these charges.
I understand where you're at. I'm trying to be as equitable between all different types of vehicles that have different types of fuel. But I appreciate your effort.
Yep, I appreciate that. Everybody needs to pay their fair share.
Do you have any other questions at this time for Representative Hoheisel? Oh, Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, do you, and I'm sorry if this was answered earlier.
Right, was.
Do you know when were the existing fees established? Do you know?
Mr. Chairman, that was 1920, was that correct? I believe. 19,
You mean for registration fees?
not the year you were born, sir, please. 2019, 2020, I believe it was my freshman first 2 years. Now, I will say this committee, I was on that committee then too, this committee advanced out fees that were higher than the ones that were in place today, and they were cut down on the floor. I believe it was an amendment from, I want to say Representative Carmichael, perhaps. And that it was pretty late in session, and they cut the fees down a little bit. So 19 or 20, I think, was when they were originally established.
You have that date, Jill. Do you know off the top of your head? 2020.
20, well, in 2019 out here and 2020 up there, so somewhere in the middle.
2019. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Next proponent is Michael White with the Kansas Contractors Association. Welcome to the committee, Michael.
I just assumed the great representative left it on. I'm sorry. Apologize. I'm Michael White, Executive Director of the Kansas Contractor Association, representing over 220 companies across the state in heavy construction, civil construction. And we supported this idea back in 2019 or whenever it was passed, whatever we decided. This idea was really came out of the Joint Transportation Task Force back in 2018. That we needed to establish these fees. Representative Francis and others were on that task force that traveled the state. And as Representative Hoheisel stated, the fees that were at that time passed by this committee and ultimately passed by the legislature, actually the fees that were recommended were about where they are today in this bill, actually. And then through other actions, they came down. And so I think really just these are, from our vantage point as an association that's very involved in funding transportation, we think this is a fairness issue. And we think that it's one of those issues in which we need to establish the right fees. And whether these numbers are right or you guys will go through the process with not only your chamber, but our friends across the rotunda, you guys will figure out what those appropriate fees are. We think these are fair, very fair fees. I'm not going to get in the argument whether they should be a little higher, a little lower, whatever, but we think these are appropriate. I will remind this committee, you guys know it, you hear from KDOT. KDOT gives you presentations every year. The cost of construction is not going down. You guys heard the secretary just a few weeks ago talk about the inflationary factor that we've seen with Ike. The bottom line is we know that it's costing more and more to maintain our infrastructure. And as you guys know, you talk to everyday Kansans all the time, they like good infrastructure. And so it costs and it takes money to do that. I have included in my testimony a study that the University of Nebraska has done that it is, because many of these vehicles are heavier than the average vehicle, there is more damage done, whether it's, when an accident occurs, to highway infrastructure. And so, again, I'm not here, I definitely don't see any advantage for anyone to be punitive. These are great vehicles, these are great companies that are building these vehicles, but At the end of the day, someone has to pay this cost. The taxpayers of Kansas have to pay this cost. And I firmly believe if we don't start making this a fairness issue and equalize as much as we can, it's going to be on others. It's going to be a burden on others, and it's going to be in the form of a motor fuels tax. And if you raise motor fuels tax to start raising additional revenues for infrastructure, it's just going to widen the disparity. So I think this is a proper approach to address the fairness issue. Let's get some equity, and then as we move forward and costs continue to rise, we can figure out how we move together as everyone's paying for the system. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I did provide a little bit of statistics from the other 39 states. We're members of ARPA, which is a national organization, and they track this. Our data is very close to what Jill has reported on here today. And I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for Mr. White at this time? Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your testimony so far. I'm envisioning in the future, I think the Turnpike Authority mentioned here a couple of weeks ago, someone runs out of gas on the turnpike, they'll go get them a gas can and fill them up and stuff. These EVs in a cold weather situation, their range is greatly diminished. If they run out of electricity out there on a cold highway someday, our KDOT Highway Patrol, private people supposed to come out and charge them? Is that going to be any added expense for more equipment and more services in the future to our highways?
You know, I think it's a fair question, a good question. What I would say to that is you might want to own a tow truck business, because more than likely that car is going to be towed. I would guess probably towed to somewhere to be charged versus someone taking something to them to charge. I don't know. I'm not an expert in these. I don't own one of these. But my guess is that they'll probably tow that vehicle somewhere to be charged, more than likely, would be my guess.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next on the agenda, we have Catherine Magana with KDOT. Welcome to the committee, Catherine.
Good afternoon, Chairman Francis and members of the committee. My name is Catherine Magana, and I'm the Legislative Liaison for the Kansas Department of Transportation, and I'm here to provide testimony in support of House Bill 2121. KDOT is supportive of this bill and the additional revenue that it would provide for the State Highway Fund and the Special and City County Highway Fund to support transportation investments in our state. We believe that consistent and sustainable revenues coming into the State Highway Fund are essential to the agency's purpose, which is delivering transportation that keeps Kansans moving forward. Kansas has seen a steady motor fuels tax increase in revenues since the motor fuels tax was adjusted in 2003, even as we've seen the number of vehicle miles traveled increase nationally by about 11%, and the average vehicle fuel efficiency increasing by 43% nationally over the same time period. As hybrid and electric vehicles become a bigger part of the Kansas fleet of registered vehicles, and we see those registrations increase, the amount of revenue collected from the sale of motor fuels is expected to stay steady or even decline in the coming years. With inflation, as was already mentioned, this results in a continued loss of purchasing power of the revenue generated, and with the increase in construction costs, we see an erosion of ability to continue to invest in the transportation system. We believe that raising registration fees for electric and hybrid vehicles would be a way to offset the motor fuels tax revenues that are not collected by those vehicle types and provide some level of parity for the vehicles that are utilizing our transportation system. We evaluated the same 39 states as were previously mentioned, and I do believe that our data closely resembles what has already previously been mentioned, and we did work with KDOR on this as well. But right now, we know that we have about 10,000 battery electric vehicles, 1,900 roughly plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and about 33,503 hybrid electric vehicles that are registered in the state. And with the researching of revenue fees in other states, we found about similar levels of, I think, average registration fees, as were previously mentioned by KLRD. Ultimately, we reflected in the fiscal note that about 2.3 million in revenue for the state highway fund would be seen in FY 2026, and about 1.2 million in increased revenue for the special city county highway fund in FY 2026, for about a total of 3.5 million in increased revenue for the state. We are happy to support this bill, but also to work with stakeholders to continue to refine what revenue fees can look like and to make sure that everyone is paying their fair share. And we are always happy to work with legislators, stakeholders, and other interest groups to make that happen. Stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Very good job, Catherine. Does anybody have any questions for Catherine at this time? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. I would like to just tag on to something that Catherine said about the future of declining revenues for the state of Kansas for fuel tax. I served on a panel at Washington State Transportation Council. 5% of our new vehicle sales in this state are EVs at this time. In Washington, it's 20%. And they've got a crisis up there on their hands. So, just keep that in mind. I've got 3 kids and 2 nephews. Within the last year, 3 of them have bought an EV. So, sometimes these things start to cascade and it becomes a harder thing to do. All right, next on the agenda, we have Fuel True. Is there anybody with Fuel True here? Welcome to the committee.
Thank you much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for taking time to hear our testimony today. I am Brian Postler. I represent Fuel True Independent Energy and Convenience. We represent as a nonprofit statewide trade association for all the independent energy distribution companies in Kansas, as well as all the fuel retailers, of which there are a little over 2,000 fuel retailer outlets in Kansas. We're in vital industry in every county and every one of your districts. And we just wanted to add our voice in support of this bill. For us, we do see it as a matter of fundamental fairness. As it is currently, the status quo is that the heavier electric vehicles, which cause greater wear and tear to the roads, end up not supporting their fair share of the maintenance of the roads, while the lighter ICE counterparts end up being taxed to subsidize these electric vehicles. Right? And so the federal government already subsidizes the purchase of those vehicles. And then now all the folks who pay the gasoline taxes are forced to subsidize and pay their fair share. And so for us, it's just a matter of fundamental fairness. In my estimation, the numbers that are in this bill currently, I know you were trying to be very reasonable, Representative Hoheisel, but they will quickly be out of date because other states are already exceeded this amount. And if they're fixed and not growing, we will soon have to come back and try to address the fairness issue again. So, we're the primary collectors of the gasoline tax. We have a lot of our retailers who are moving towards trying at great expense to install high-speed chargers. We see electric vehicles as kind of the future of the industry. They're not as popular in Kansas as they are in some states, and they're not growing as fast here as they are in some states, but that is likely the future. And if we don't make some sort of plan for how we're going to fund the roads, our option is going to have to be raising revenue in other ways. And that means an increased gasoline tax or something else. So it's only prudent for us to say, let's be fair. Let's figure out a way that everyone pays for the use of the roads fairly and equitably. So with that, I'll yield to any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have any questions for Brian? Seeing none. Next on the agenda is Wendy Stark with the League of Kansas Municipalities. Welcome to the committee, Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm here, Wendy Stark with the League of Kansas Municipalities, and we are a membership organization of over 550 cities and about 40 counties. As such, our members develop a statement of municipal policy each year. And just within the last few years, we have added a statement regarding EV funding, or actually, sorry, if charges for EV are adopted by the state, just ensuring that that money does go into the Special City County Highway Fund. And the intent of this bill aligns with our policy. And so we are in support of this bill, and Would be happy to stand for any questions. I don't want to repeat what everyone else has said, so.
Does anybody have any questions for Wendy? Okay. Seeing none, thank you. Next on the agenda is Nick Steingart, Director of State Affairs for the Alliance of Automotive Innovation. He's written only? All right, if everybody all, so the Alliance, Sandy, could you come up and explain to the committee who the Alliance for Automotive Innovation is? Would you mind introducing yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Braden with Braden, Heidner and Lowe. And our client is the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. And it is made up of vendors as well as all of the manufacturers of automobiles in the country. So that's who we are. And I have written testimony from Nick, and I know Nick's been in conversations with the chairman too.
And just to point out in Nick's testimony, as Representative Hoheisel talked, you know, you can skin this cat a lot of different ways. You know, we sat down and had good conversations. You know, he feels like the hybrid registration fee should be $85. That's part of his testimony. But it would be fair to say with that $85 registration fee, the Alliance is in support of this bill. Is that correct? Okay, thank you very much. We also have written testimony from Claudia Hassong with the Kansas Farm Bureau. And next, do we have any other proponents for this bill? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to neutral. We have one neutral, John Federico with, on behalf of General Motors. Welcome to the committee, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Federico with Federico Durst Consulting Group, here on behalf of General Motors. We maintain a neutral position on House Bill 2121 and respectfully ask that you give fair consideration to an amendment to the bill. As a reminder, the General Motors Fairfax Assembly Plant has been producing world-class quality vehicles in Kansas since 1945. The Fairfax Assembly Plant was the first industrial facility to operate as a dual-purpose manufacturer, producing both automobiles and jet fighters in the same building. The present facility was constructed in 1985 and has received numerous awards, including North America Car of the Year for the Chevy Malibu, as well as the Buick LaCrosse, earning a top safety rating by NHTSA. General Motors is proud of their long history in Kansas, where they employ more than 2,000 people and have invested over $1.5 billion into their Kansas facility over the last decade or so. We were particularly excited at the most recent news that GM chose their Kansas facility to produce the next generation Chevrolet Bolt electric vehicle, as mentioned by Representative Hoheisel. I might mention that getting new products into manufacturing facilities is quite challenging. The competition is stiff between states that have automobile manufacturing facilities where incentives are thrown around quite a bit. So we were very happy to win that product. In support of that effort, GM has initiated currently a $390 million investment to retool their assembly line at the Fairfax facility. It is with that commitment to Kansas in mind that General Motors takes a keen interest in any legislation that might serve as a barrier to purchase the vehicles they are making in Kansas for those customers that prefer to buy an electric vehicle. Might be the most important line based on conversations I have had with the testimony you've heard. General Motors does believe that every driver using Kansas roads should pay their fair share, which brings us to our neutral position on the bill. We would, however, ask you to consider a couple of things. On the back half of my testimony, the first consideration, which I'll give tepid support to would be deferring or delaying implementation on any policy on electric vehicles until they constitute a meaningful proportion of the total registered fleet. We'll throw around a lot of numbers, and I think we could take an hour to discuss who has the right numbers, but the information I'm providing is from General Motors, where they said, according to the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, the market share for all electric vehicles in Kansas is 1%. Since 2011, only 12,000 all-electric vehicles have been sold in Kansas. What I would like to focus on is number 2, where that the fees on all-electric vehicles be proportional to the amount an internal combustion engine vehicle pays in annual Kansas gas taxes. Again, we can dispute whether it's 15,000 miles, 12,000 miles. The calculations afforded to us suggest that on average, the Kansas consumer pays $121.70. When you add the registration fee on top of that, whether it be $30 or $40, brings you up about to where you are. We would respectfully ask that you, for the sake of parity and goodwill towards a longstanding Kansas corporation making investments in Kansas, that we lower the current proposed fee of $175 down to $165. And it's with that, I'm happy to defend that position, answer any questions you have, Mr. Chairman.
You have any questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
I apologize. I meant to thank you and congratulate you and the sponsor of the bill for the research you did put in it and listening to me babble on in your office and in the hallway about this bill.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Mr. Federico? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Federico. I'm interested in your amendment ideas. I was just curious, what would you consider a meaningful proportion of the registered fleet? And it's currently 1%. Is there kind of a threshold that would equate to?
They did not provide that to me.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm
That's a
interested
great
in that
question,
idea.
Fair question, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I might talk to you more about that offline. Thank you.
Representative Delperdane.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, John. On your last statement, did you say 165?
Correct.
Because it's 125 I'm seeing here on your written, so.
The chairman and the sponsor bill are very persuasive.
Okay.
The $40 on, that represents the gas that's used. We already pay a $40 registration fee, and it's inclusive. So if you add the $40 registration fee for the heavier vehicle.
That's what I needed, okay. And then second question, I don't know if you'd know this or not, but today, if you pull in on Interstate 70 to a refueling station, is there a road tax imposed on the charge?
I don't.
And I don't know if, would the revisor have an answer on that? I'm sorry. Oh, today, if you pull into a recharging station, I'm just going to say on I-70 across state, is there a recharging fuel tax fee imposed? There is.
Sales tax.
Sales tax, but not road tax.
Additional to the sales tax, but it's whatever the local sales tax is.
But it's not a road tax then?
It's the local sales tax. It's not the state sales tax. And you pay the franchise fees.
Okay, so it's not a double taxation or anything going on
It
there?
is equivalent to what 24-cent gas tax is.
It is.
On what the average price that you
Okay.
pay it for. I can show you the spreadsheet.
Yeah, I'm just curious because are we charging the road tax there plus a road tax on the registration? I want to make sure that's not the case.
But one of the things is 80% of the charging on EV car happens at home. And on the residential utility.
I agree.
you don't pay a sales tax.
Okay, no, thank you.
80 to 90% of that happens at home. So we catch the out-of-staters really well. Representative Minix.
Thank you, John. Maybe I should have asked this when the True Fuel people were up here. Has the state of Kansas subsidized the installation of charging units across the state of Kansas? And do we do the same thing with gasoline fuel pumps? It seems to me like the state's given some grants across the state to put in charging stations in places. And I'm just trying to get my handle on the entire cost of the state of Kansas, road maintenance and everything else. If we're actually subsidizing one and not the other so much.
Did you want to answer that?
I don't, probably is a question better equipped, yeah.
Ryan, did you have an answer for that?
Thank you, Representative Minix, for the question. Primarily, the largest share of the grants have been federal grants. Very limited state funds have been used. There was actually a bill I saw proposed that may or may not still drop this session, seeking to increase grant programs for EV chargers at the state level. But primarily, it's been federal funds that have been the grants as a source. It could be. They were, they might have come through the state coffers, but I think the source was federal money. KDOT has done some grants, but not near as much as the federal government has done.
Catherine, are you prepared to answer, or is Corey or someone? Yeah, introduce yourself, ma'am. And yeah, go ahead.
Tammy Alexander, I'm the Alternative Fuels Program Manager at KDOT. We do have some federal funding right now. The NEVI funding that we had awarded last January and then again this past September. Those stations are in various processes. The other funds that you potentially are referring to were the Volkswagen settlement funds that awarded for, what did we end up with, 5 stations, I think? 5 stations that we awarded with that, but there was no state funding used for that.
Anything else, Jim? And by the way, just roughly for my interest, what is the average cost per pump of the federal funding? Do you have any idea off the top of your head?
The average award for the NEVI stations, which is for 150 kilowatt or larger, it's going to be 4 chargers, was $768,000 plus an additional 20% private investment.
Okay. Representative Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And John, I guess this question is for you. Is the proposal that you outlined only applicable to all electric vehicles? It's not applicable to a hybrid or whatever?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then maybe a question just as an overhead. You know, in the heavy trucks, the commercial trucks, we have a proportional use thing where a truck registered in Indiana will pay for use of our roads. If I have an all-electric vehicle and I live in Missouri and I want to drive through Kansas to Oklahoma or Colorado, are we collecting any kind of a road use tax in any way from those vehicles? Because they don't, they don't, if it's an all-electric vehicle, they're not going to pay the 24-cent tax on fuel. So I was just wondering.
I can answer that. IFTA, which is the national organization that prorates mileage across the nation with the diesel tax, they have just recently changed their form to allow trucking companies to support alternative fueled vehicles. Indiana has passed a law on that. Kansas has not. We're purposely keeping this narrow at this time. Sometime, hopefully next session, we can address the commercial motor vehicles. We need to sit down with Amazon, some of the other companies that are implementing that now. They know it's a problem. We need to figure out what's equitable and fair to them, and we just don't want to cloud the issue right now. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, this is just a statement, not a question, but I am appreciative of the investment GM has made here in choosing the best state to invest in and the best workforce. So I'm thankful that they're coming, and thank you for being with us a little bit on this to find that kind of sweet spot that we've been talking about. So again, thank you to GM for bringing all that investment to Kansas.
Greatly appreciate that.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Federico? So as always, Representative Hoheisel is 2 steps ahead of me, but, kudos to General Motors. We appreciate their investment in our state, and they've been a good partner with us, and we appreciate their willingness to work with us on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Do we have any other neutral testimony? Seeing none, we'll move on to our one opponent testimony. Welcome to the committee. We have Zach Pastora with the Sierra Club. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I am Zach Pastora, proud lobbyist and new director for the Kansas chapter of Sierra Club. Honored to be before you today. We represent nearly 5,000 members and 18,000 supporters across the state, caring for the great outdoors. Many of our members are exploring, and even some have already made the leap into buying electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles to, in their mind, do their part to help out the planet and help out the state. Respectfully, we stand before you opposed to the legislation as written. We do appreciate a number of things within this bill. We are feeling a little lonely as being the only dissenter here, but I'll say that there's been a good faith effort. I think we appreciate the interest in not being punitive, the interest in being equitable. I think where we have some concerns is about the math and trying to figure out how we can come up with what is the most appropriate number, and then also what's the appropriate public benefit and value that electric vehicle drivers offer to Kansas at large, beyond contributing to the state highway fund, but what else are they doing to help Kansas be a better place by their purchase and investment in electric vehicles? So just to go through a few of these things, but we'll start out with the good. We do appreciate the fees being distributed at the local level. That makes sense to us, and happy to see that there in Section 2. It makes sense to us that we include electric trucks, the cyber trucks that were brought up, electric motorcycles. All fine with that. We appreciate the diligence that went into coming up with those matters on the proposal. Also, I'll say that where we kind of face the problem is that in the math is, like I said, our members do feel like it is punitive as is, and for one big reason is that these aren't electric vehicles and hybrids aren't your average vehicles, but these aren't your average drivers as conventional drivers are, and I'll explain why. If you look at my testimony, and this is either on the back or the second page, there's a chart here, and this was a pretty comprehensive study by the George Washington University's Department of Engineering, the National Renewable Energy Lab, that did odometer readings from millions of used cars and SUVs and took a look at 6 other previous studies concerning the driving rate from hybrid and electric vehicles versus conventional internal combustion vehicles. And the conclusion here from these researchers said that EV cars on average drive 4,000 less miles annually compared to their ICE vehicle counterparts. For SUVs, about 3,000 less miles. And so what we'd propose to you is that if EVs and hybrids, because of folks caring about the environment and not wanting to take as many trips, maybe the range anxiety, we can't go on as long of trips, they're driving less. That's what the data shows. So their impact to the roads and therefore to the highway funds should be proportionally less if we're talking about parity and equity. So you have that in front of you. Now, happy to have the discussions with the proponents, with the other stakeholders about what a fair number would be. What I heard was that we're basing it on average miles a Kansas drives, but what we're saying is electric vehicle and hybrid Kansas owners don't drive as much, and so how can we true that up? The other thing is we'll say is if we zoom out, it feels like we were part of the conversations in 2019 and compromising the last time we raised registration fees on electric and hybrid vehicles, and here we are again. It doesn't feel like other drivers are picking up their fair share of the tab. okay? That's what electric vehicles feel like. They're doing a positive thing for the state, buying new vehicles, et cetera. But the gas tax hasn't gone up in 20 years. It hasn't been consistent with inflation. Cumulative inflation has gone up 65 cents on the dollar. Okay, so if we're really talking about increasing and we're really worried about state highway fund, then we got to zoom out a little bit, or this has got to be one piece of the puzzle. And so maybe y'all are on that mission, but I just want to say it feels like electric vehicles are being scrutinized, discriminated against, and so for what that's worth. Also say, we do feel like there's double taxes going on. There's sales tax at the local level. Electric vehicle drivers sent me a bill that they paid at a charging station. They got to pay for the electricity. They got to pay for the state sales tax and the local sales tax. And so that's there. And then they got to pay these higher than registration fees. Right now, it's 2.5 times more registration fees for all electric vehicles than ICE vehicles. And so this bill would make it more than 4 times more. So just trying to get the calculations correct. And then again, it's like, who's really doing the damage to the roads? Okay. Are semis that are still paying, you know, $40 or however much they're paying, are how much more proportional damage to the roads are they doing? Traffic accidents, noise, air pollution. Okay, when we saw the pandemic happen, we saw clear skies over some of our big cities for a change because people weren't driving. What is the public benefit that EV and hybrid vehicles owners offer by offsetting that air pollution impact? They're not compensated at the state level for that. We do have federal incentives right now. I'll be surprised if those hang on here in the coming months or years with a change in administration. And then lastly, and I didn't think I was going to say this, I think the biggest thing, a way to protect our state highway funds is for y'all to make sure that the funds are not swept. Okay, so that's a big obligation. We had a period in the past where funds got swept, and we're probably looking at decades, even centuries of making up that difference. So I appreciate all the public service that y'all have, making a fiscally responsible budget this year, lowering the cost of Kansans. We hope that applies to electric vehicle and hybrid owners as well. Thank you for your time.
And we've got a few questions for you. Representative Proctor.
Mr. Chairman, I got a couple questions if I could.
Sure.
So is currently a person purchases and uses an EV, is any portion of that initial or that operating cost going to maintaining or building our state highways?
As far as I know, the registration fees do. As far as the economic impact, I buy it off the lot to the dealer or whatever. Not that I'm aware of that money actually goes back to the roads unless there's some arrangement with the dealer. So good point.
And then my next question, the average EV, do you have a figure on how much state or federal subsidy goes into lowering the price of that vehicle to incentivize purchase?
My understanding is there's nothing on the state level to incentivize that. Currently, we have a national, I believe it's $7,500 incentive for all electric.
So my concern with your testimony is you're paying a much lower amount of the cost to build and maintain our state highways than a internal combustion engine vehicle user. So your road use is somewhat subsidized or partially subsidized by that lack of fee, and the price of the vehicle is subsidized to the amount of $7,500-ish. So this really, what you're saying is that you feel it's unfair that you're being subsidized slightly less than you're already being subsidized.
I'll say that, you know, hybrid vehicles still pay into the state highway via the gas tax. They still buy gas, okay? So there's that, you know, we feel like for a more efficient vehicle shouldn't be penalized, right? If you buy a, you know, gas guzzler Hummer, you know, you will pay a little more in gas tax. if you're a semi, you're going to pay more in gas tax. Is that proportional to the damage you do to the roads is something we're bringing forth to you today. But we feel like we do pay our fair share in a lot of ways because we pay higher registration fees, and that's why things landed where they were in 2019. What we feel like we have an update, we are talking about increasing the fees again on electric vehicle and hybrid owners, and when we haven't been doing the same proportionally to the conventional vehicles. So that's what we're trying to raise.
Chair, just one more if I could. And in your testimony, you said that the public good offset that we're getting for this amount of money is that EV owners are not contributing to air pollution. What percentage of the electricity that's generated in the state that goes into the batteries in those vehicles comes from fossil fuels?
Yeah, good question. So that's one thing I did include in my testimony is that electric vehicles may help the broader needs of increased demand to the electrical grid. We had an electric rate study a few years back that identified electric vehicles as having beneficial impact to the electrical grid. I'll say that in Kansas, I'm glad you asked, is that we get more of our power coming from Kansas wind for electricity than any other resource. That's pretty exciting. Can't say the same for on the fossil fuel side because we import, I would say, about half of our fossil fuels from other states. Okay, I could be wrong on that, but that's been my traditional understanding. More so, I'll say that those that are buying electric vehicles are also thinking about solar panels. And I can power my vehicle with power that I'm getting from Kansas sun on my own house and all that. And, you know, then they're paying property taxes on the solar panels for increased home value and all that stuff. So we feel like we're trying to do the right thing for Kansas economy and the environment, yet we have bills like this that feels like we're being penalized for doing that. So
It's been a while since I've been in the Utilities and Energy Committee. I'm not on it this year, but I believe that a significant percentage of the electricity that's generated in the state is generated by natural gas or coal. And so, you know, if the energy that goes into the electric vehicle is generated by fossil fuel, then you're just shifting where the fossil fuel gets burned. I'll stop there. I'm off my soapbox, Mr. Chair.
No, we're going to have to go down this rabbit hole a little bit. I'm going to exercise my prerogative just a little bit. You made a statement that EVs are beneficial to the grid. How is it beneficial to the grid? My understanding is new EVs are going to be stressing our grid and stressing our ability to meet the energy demands of this country. How is that beneficial?
well, again, I'll go back to the testimony that says, you know, right now we're at 1% electric vehicle adoption in Kansas. So, you know, we're talking about stressing the grid maybe way into the future. Right now, we're primarily charging our electric vehicles overnight. You know, you plug them in when you get home, charge them overnight, you're back in action for the next day. A lot of times in Kansas that's unused energy. We have amazing wind resources that are actually generating at or below $0 pricing on the Southwest Power Pool market over the nighttime. And so it's pretty amazing. We're actually creating a new opportunity to spread the load, the demand of the electricity and fixed costs over a larger period of users demand it. So if that makes sense, I don't know if I said that quite right in terms of we got peaks and valleys of our energy use. You know, we use a lot of energy at nighttime, in the middle of the day in the air conditioning, afternoon, right when we get home. In the middle of the night when these electric vehicles are charging, we don't have as much demand. So actually that buying of electricity then offsets the peak demand costs, those fixed costs. So utility chairman might be able to explain it better than I, but just to go back, it's exciting in Kansas when we're talking about American energy independence. We're talking about opportunity to expand our clean energy resources. And what we've done with wind in 20 years has been incredible, yet for a top 10 state for the sun, we're second to last in solar power right now. And so we could harness more of our electricity. I think it's about 30% or so coal, 40% wind, and 15 to 20% nuclear, and the rest gas.
That's
So
fine, Zach. I don't
yeah,
want to get
okay.
into
Yeah.
the value of different energy sources to produce electricity, but it just seems disingenuous to me that increasing the strain on our grid somehow makes it healthier. I'd like to let the utility chair, was your question around the grid at all?
It gets into it eventually, yeah. So it was just
All right, let's try to be concise.
two
It's
questions,
2:40.
two questions, if I may. So you made comments about homeowners using solar panels and charging, and yeah, I 100% agree with that. What's your thoughts of me filling my pickup with red diesel
Versus
road tax diesel? Red is no road tax. It's highly illegal. But what's your thoughts on that? That's no different than me filling my electric vehicle with a solar panel.
I mean, no, I think that's a good point in terms of, I think, how we pay for roads and all that stuff. We certainly don't want to do anything illegal. And, charging our electric vehicles with investments we make in our own properties isn't illegal. We'd argue it's good for Kansas. So how do we allocate appropriate costs to the highway, state highway fund, and the future of highway infrastructure is an important question. So. And that's what we're trying to say is, instead of doing this little piece of the puzzle, let's zoom out and do a little bit more analysis on what is equitable.
And then I'm a little disgusted with the rep down the hall here. You hit me on some questions I was going to do, but can you tell me what actually powers an EV? What actually powers an electric vehicle?
You might know more than I do. I think it's electricity powering a fuel cell battery sort of thing.
Sure.
Okay.
I just looked it up. So the information I've got is about 5 minutes old because I was waiting in line to get on the question. I charge my EV right now. It's 37% coal, 24% natural gas, 6% nuclear. Renewables do pop in there at about 30%, and then you've got other, including methanes and so forth, at about 3%. So, I mean, you do have the argument we're running coal burners here. How does that save with the pollutants? I mean, what are we trying to do here?
Yes, and Chairman and Representative, I assume you're talking about our SPP data and what we're using. Okay.
Live online.
Yes, so that's accurate. We do have ebbs and flows of where the electricity comes from in Kansas. We're fortunate enough that on the whole, on average, we use more of our electricity is coming from Kansas wind than any other resource, which is pretty exciting. I know it's not right now, but we talk about the whole year and we talk about, so that's what I'm saying. So.
But anyway, I do appreciate your testimony. You know I'm fair on the energy resources. It all has its place. But we just need to work out this really complex issue, and I'm all ears on it. So thank you for being here.
Representative Paul Heisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have several questions, but I'll limit myself to two and then one quick follow-on.
By the way, let's try to limit ourselves to two now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first thing you said was the math is off with the fees. You're not considering, as far as I know on your math, the federal fuel sales tax that EVs are not currently paying. So even if we adopted my math, and according to my math and your math, it's probably gonna be a little below that, you guys are still, or I shouldn't say you guys, I'm sorry, EV drivers are still getting the benefit of not paying the federal fuels tax. Is that correct?
Again, all electric vehicles are not paying any of the gas taxes, federal or state, right?
Yeah. So they would still, like I said, even if my math is correct, or we'll say even your math and it comes down a little bit is correct, EV drivers are still saving the money because my math is only based on state fuels tax and not federal, and there's no way to recoup the federal. So there still is an inherent benefit. The EV drivers, even under this legislation, HB 2121, because they're not paying the federal fuels tax. Would that be a fair? Okay. Okay, you're following me there in a kind of way. Okay. The second question, just really confusing question. He says equality and road repairs increase fees on the real road records. Quote, compared to traditional fuel combustion vehicles, electric and hybrid vehicles are advantageous to their heavyweight counterparts when it comes to road damage, road safety, air pollution, and you list. And then you're comparing it to heavy trucks and commercial vans. Do you have any data to back this up? Because EVs are on average 10 to 30 to 4, I've even seen some of 40% heavier than their traditional fuel combustion vehicles. So why are we saying those are the real road records, and why are we talking about heavyweight counterparts when EVs are the heavyweight counterparts?
Oh, that's a good point, committee and representative. I think that's a fair point. If electric vehicles, by being heavier with having a battery, are doing a disproportionate impact to the road, then that ought to be part of the consideration. What we're saying is and as you pointed out, is that it feels like electric vehicles and hybrids are being unfairly targeted when semi-trucks have a bigger impact compared to what we think that they're paying as far as road damage, safety, air pollution, et cetera. So I will say, if I can help provide the data, I kind of took it out because I've been seeing different numbers and I didn't feel like it was fair to offer a number that was maybe differing to compare it on the literature. The Government Accountability Office has numbers that they've done for federal conversations about this before, but some of those felt like a little outdated. So I don't know if our Department of Transportation has any of those numbers or not, as far as if you got, an 18-wheeler versus a heavy cyber truck, what is the damage to the road?
So when we come back in a few years and have a discussion on electric semis, will you guys be opposed then?
If we can iron out what is really parity here, and that's what I would hope I said that loud and clear, is that we're committed to, as you are, finding out what is the magic number with all this.
And Mr. Chair, one quick last question. You mentioned something about sweeps of KDOT, correct? How much did Michael White pay you to say that? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps unlike my colleagues, I want to thank you for being here. And I want to highlight some parts of your testimony that I've been thinking about that I think are important points to make. Not that I'm, like you have said, necessarily opposed to the fees. I just, I want to make sure that we're considering all elements of this bill. First being that, I asked earlier, when was the last time that we updated these fees? It was 2020. And I appreciate that in your testimony, you do note that the last time that the motor fuel sales tax was updated was 2004. So I think that should be part of the conversation when we are talking about revenue sources. If we've done this 5 years ago, then maybe that's something we should also take a look at. And then I also appreciated your points. I think we're having a conversation today about equity and fairness, but I think when we have that conversation, we have to talk about all the total negative externalities of that car or transportation source. And, so we talk about road damage, but I do think that pollution and contributions to climate change and other negative externalities are important things to consider in the cost that those generate for our state. In addition to just the road damage. I think those are important points to consider. So I really appreciate you bringing those things up. The one thing I wanted to ask is I did pull the numbers based on the actual average usage for electric vehicle owners that you put in here and calculated that using the representative from Wichita's calculation that he had in his testimony. And I think that would put all electric vehicles at about $100 registration fee, which is the current, I understand. So keeping them maybe at the current, and then this bill would add the registration fee for the trucks, which using your numbers would be about $125. I don't know if that is something that you kind of agree with, but that was the numbers that I pulled based on your testimony. So that's something maybe for the committee to consider as well, based on actual road usage of EVs. So just some comments I wanted to make. Thank you.
Representative Vaughn, when you did that, did you add the $40 in on top of that, or was that inclusive?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the numbers I pulled for the all-electric vehicles, the data that he cited, the road usage was 7,165 miles compared to 11,642 for cars. So the 7,165 divided by 25.5 miles per gallon times the 0.24 was 67.43 plus 30 to equal 97.43, or about $100. 40, okay, so then that would be $107.43.
Did you have anything else?
No, that was it. I just wanted to make this comment.
Representative Bohai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. My question is this. I felt like, and maybe I misheard you during your testimony, that you said this was Kansas drivers' mileage, but I see that the information is coming from, is it George Washington University? So actually, where is the study of these vehicles? What vehicles are we referring to? Are we referring to vehicles over in Missouri, over in St. Louis? Because Kansas is a great open space, right? So is this actually for Kansas numbers?
Great question, Representative. The study, it was a national study, so it took not just the data from vehicles across the United States. So I did say Kansas drivers quite a bit, but when we're talking about the study here, and I don't know if the department has any specific numbers for Kansas compared to, electric and hybrid vehicles versus internal combustion engines, but this study was talking about nationally.
No, I thank you for correcting that because I don't think that was in your testimony. Thank you.
Representative Helgerson.
One thing that hasn't been mentioned that should be, don't forget that the sales tax, 18% of the sales tax goes to maintain the road. So if I don't own a car, don't drive it, I still pay 18% to make sure that the highways are in good standing, although you do have those indirect costs, which we don't even calculate, that need to be calculated, that when I go to the grocery store, when I buy something else, that gets added in the tax structure. So keep that in mind.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent a very sparsely populated district, 7,380 square miles, still 23,000 people like everybody else around this table. Many of them are 20 miles from a grocery store. Many of them are 40 plus miles from a Walmart. In fact, I don't have a Walmart within my 9-county district. We drive lots of miles. I think my average citizen out there will drive far more miles than what this is averaged on a national basis. A reasonable person from my area would ask you, we're already paying our fair share of road taxes out there, and we also host coal-fired plants, windmills, and a little bit of solar generation. And I'll challenge anybody to look at the Southwest Power Pool, and the people in my district would say, do you really believe that car charged or plugged in at night is powered by solar or wind? I think it's fossil fuel. In my area, the wind doesn't blow that much at night and the sun isn't shining. And if you come home at 5 and put your car in the garage and plug it in, the question was asked earlier about who actually makes that electricity. In my area, I think I have 23,000 people that know.
Well, I appreciate the distinction there with, in some ways, rural residents and those that have to drive farther versus urban dwellers here in Kansas. So I think that's important, and I think that was part of the interest in vehicle miles traveled and all that stuff. And I know that debate has not progressed. As far as, electricity, I don't want to dive into it because I think a conversation about transportation and all that's important. Happy to talk to you more. I think the evidence I see is that wind blows more at night than it does during the day generally. So I would respectfully disagree to that. Now, I can't disagree with your opinion and personal observations, so I'll always respect that. But that's my understanding, and as far as that goes, as far as wind power being more abundant at night.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real briefly, and I don't know if you want to answer this or maybe Mr. Federico. What is the average life expectancy of a total EV vehicle? Because I'm assuming that the battery is the major component, correct?
It is, and this was a long walk to tell you, I don't know. I apologize. I can get you that information, though. I'll get back to you.
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
You bet.
And while you're there, we were talking about costs of a internal combustion type engine vehicle versus an EV. Maybe you do this, maybe you don't. What is the cost per mile over, say, I don't know say 8 years? Is that something you could find out on an EV versus an internal combustion?
I can, yes.
Okay, I'd appreciate that.
As well. I'll deliver it to the chairman to give to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Van Houten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think my comment, so my perspective on the EV, which we have an EV, Tesla Model 3, is people are purchasing those not for environmental reasons. They're purchasing them for performance and technology. Like, I prefer to drive it around town. So I think the environmental component on that, if there is benefit to the environment, people are purchasing them for other reasons, right? and then my perspective on roads, having been on city council for 3 years, is we've got to be fair and equitable for our roads. It's a major drain on city, on state. For us, it was about 15% of our revenues would go back into maintenance of our roads. We have 116 lane miles. So I think the representative down from me, I think his proposal here makes very good sense. I think it's fair to everyone. And
Thank you very much. All right, committee, did you have something that you needed to say, Representative Hall? It's 3 o'clock. Tomorrow, we're going to have the Kansas Motor Carriers Association presentation. I want everybody to be ready to take action on the two road naming bills that we heard earlier. I think we've got one minor amendment on one. It's a technical correction. Also, Chris has got me an amendment that I think will make it very clear that if you're teaching motorcycle classes, you have to have a motorcycle endorsement on your deal. So hopefully we can get that passed out this time. As far as next week, it's going to be really busy. We got a lot of stuff coming together. I think on Monday, we're going to work that bill about the HP majors, the change in classification on that. So read up on that. We've got something on ignition interlocks. And I believe we're going to do, Travis, did I say we're going to do the, and we're going to do the KDOR bill on something about a threshold limit for allowing quarterly payments for certain truck and truck annual vehicle registration fees. I know there's some concerns in the trucking industry about that bill, so try to be prepared for those things. So with that, committee, we're adjourned.